recording.
All right. Good afternoon again. The meeting of the Independent Ethics Board is now called to order on this day, June 16th, 2020, and it is approximately 5:04 p.m. This is once again a video conference meeting. It is live streamed on the Ethics Office's webpage, and it will be recording for future reference. Ms. Atkins isn't here, so Mr. Floyd, can you call the roll?
Yes, sir. Ernie Payne. Ruby Barr. Where are you, Ruby?
Here.
Thank you. Gwen Graham.
Here.
Richard Herring.
Here.
Brian Smith.
Present.
Carlos Ray.
Present.
Kristin Kosta.
Here.
Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
All right. Before we proceed with this meeting, I would like to introduce our newest board member, Mrs. Kristin Kosta, to the public. Ms. Kosta, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind.
Sure. My name is Kristin Kosta, and I am almost a lifelong Tallahassee resident. I've been here since I was 5 years old. I work as a physician assistant at Southeastern Plastic Surgery, where I do all kinds of fun things on the reconstructive side of things, as well as on the cosmetic side of things.
Thank you so much. I'm sure we'll all get to know you a little better. And again, it's a pleasure to have you join us.
Thank you.
All right. I'll go through housekeeping procedures for public comment and for conducting this meeting. First, we'd like to thank those working behind the scenes, all who make this important, especially the technology gurus. I believe all of the board members are online now. Board members, when we're not speaking, if we could keep our microphones on mute. This will be a conversational meeting, so you don't have to raise your hand to speak. To the public, you may have noticed that your audio is muted. There are several hosts of this meeting who are managing speaker access and will turn on the public microphones when it's your time to speak. Last week, we asked the public to submit comments in advance of today's meeting. I believe we have a list that has been compiled, and board members will have that disseminated. In addition, those who have not submitted comments, you will be given a chance to speak on agenda and non-agenda items as scheduled. We have your information and we will call you at that opportunity. We will also accept comments from our website or ethics@talgov, that's TALGOV.com, until we are on agenda item 6. For logistical reasons, we will not accept requests to comment after that time. Finally, we ask that everyone show patience. There is a delay with online communications from time to time, and we have people actively working on those in case, and we'd like to thank the public for their interest. Your input is very, very important to us. Board members, has everyone received the agenda and all supporting documents?
Yes. Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
just one quick comment for the board members who are on their computers. Hitting the space bar mutes and unmutes you. So that's a quick and easy way to deal with muting.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Did you all receive your documents in time to review them? I'll take the nods as affirmative.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
are you talking about other documents besides what's posted on the website, the agenda?
Those as well as
You just muted.
those and things that were recently emailed to you. All right. So we have minutes from the May 17th meeting. I I'll give you time to review those, and then I'll be looking for an approval of the minutes.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
yeah, if it'd be all possible, I did send out a couple of forms. They're very technical changes that we discussed briefly yesterday to see if we could maybe amend the agenda and put that between items number 8 and 9 to see if that's something the board would be willing to consider today.
All right, and that's the advisory opinion form and the
Sworn complaint form. Yes.
any objections to that? Anyone? All right. Well, we will take that recommendation, Mr. Reed.
Am I missing something? Got really quiet.
Oh yeah, I guess I thought people were looking at the minutes. So,
Oh, okay.
all right. Do I hear a motion to approve?
I'd move to approve the minutes, Mr. Chairman.
All right, so moved.
Second.
All right. All right. We'll move to the ethics officer report. Mr. Floyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have a written summary. So I'll briefly say that we're still adjusting to the pandemic and the online meeting. I want to thank Mr. Payne in particular for assisting with multiple practice runs of the web events to make sure we could have this meeting. You have no idea how many hours were spent just setting up the meeting and organizing the meeting. Some of the tasks that we completed were updating the ethics board web pages. We still had some things that are out of date, and that's something we're still looking at. We're still working on Citizens Guide. We're working on restructuring the web page and adding things such as frequently asked questions and providing more information on board activities and board members. We're still developing training material, documenting staff procedures, updating historical documents, preparing documents for chair signature, routine things of that nature. We had one major payment, one major expenditure to Attorney Menace, and that was the only major expenditure. And more or less that pretty much summarizes the past month. I also should mention, and I say this for last, that I called the city auditor to ask him to appear before the board to share information on a survey, an ethics climate survey that the city auditor's office conducted. Within that conversation, I quickly learned that the city is moving forward with a proposal to establish an inspector general. And followed up in discussions with the chair and with the board attorney. And I'll let the chair talk about that a little bit.
Okay, you all. Okay. As Mr. Floyd was just expressing, the Inspector General, I guess tomorrow the commission is expecting to vote on their Inspector General position. We see a lot of aspects of that may be, I guess, duplication of some of our duties. So it was a little concerning to see some of that. And again, we weren't, with this board, wasn't informed prior to or consulted in any way on our thoughts about that. We think that there are some. I thought there were some positives to it, but I still would like for that commission to know that we have some reservations about certain aspects of that. Mr. Reed, did you have anything you want to add to that, or anyone else?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
I know the last I had heard about discussions, they were still pondering exactly how things are going to be configured, but am I correct that the new Inspector General will report to the mayor and city commission? As far as you know?
Yes.
Lloyd nodding, yes. I think that would be, to me, the biggest thing that would distinguish us from the Inspector General is that we would be the one entity that would be independent of the mayor and city commission and not subject to hiring and firing. We might be subject to bluster, but nothing else.
I think that, and we talked about it quite a bit, and John can share some of the positives. I think one of the major concerns is that they would have a fraud, abuse, and waste hotline, similar to what the board has. And there's a chance that the two could, potentially there's a chance that two could get confused and they could end up receiving confidential complaints that should go to the board. You know, that's one of the particular concerns that we have. There were some positives, and I guess John can talk to both.
Yeah, I think one, I thought it was positive. We've discussed numerous times the issue of whistleblower and who's the receiving agent for that. That this would clearly remedy that issue, and I think that's a very positive development for the city. The only concern I would raise, and I know that I think tomorrow is the first. It says the first and only public hearing, so this is moving pretty quickly. And I don't know if we'll have any opportunity to participate in the crafting. I mean, the ordinance is already drafted. But if we've struggled with the issue of keeping certain issues confidential, and if there are now two hotlines being run instead of one, the average member of the public may call an ethics complaint into the Inspector General's hotline, or they may call a whistleblower complaint into our hotline, and that would be the incorrect hotline. And my concern is that do we run a risk of now losing confidentiality of these complaints, because that's an issue that we've dealt with our hotline calls, our anonymous complaints, trying to keep everything confidential as permitted under 112.324. And I wish we had more time to determine whether there's any risks posed by the ordinance as drafted.
Mr. Chair, I had one question for Amy, if I may.
Yes.
Amy, is there, I think I remember, is there one hearing scheduled for July 8th? Do you know?
Tomorrow is the introduction of the ordinance, and the public hearing on the ordinance is on July 8th.
Okay. And that is the only hearing, correct?
Yes, that's typically how it works. It's introduced and then there's a public hearing.
Okay. And that's procedural information. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Herring?
We obviously can't control what the new Inspector General would do, but would it be appropriate for us, once we know more about the structure of the new Inspector General, for us to adopt a policy, procedure, bylaw, whatever is appropriate form that would discuss how the overlapping hotlines would work from our perspective? Just to be clear, and to have something out there that would be available to the public to try to distinguish the two things?
I think that would be the responsible route for us to take. Mr. Payne, were you trying to say something?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think that would be the route that we should take. Again, it would be in an advisory capacity, and I think it would help their role be more efficient. Anyone else have any thoughts on this? Mr. Floyd and Mr. Reed and I had discussed drafting a statement that could be attached to that commission's public comments. And so I also wanted to get your thoughts on that. If you think that's an idea that makes sense, or should we respond after they have their ordinance passed and then try to collaborate? And if it's something that you think we should do, I think they have to receive any comments by tomorrow morning at 11. That's something, if you think as a board we should do. Do you have any suggestions on words or aspects of that communication?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
the deadline is actually not tomorrow. They're introducing the ordinance tomorrow. The public hearing is in July.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we would have that long, and I do think it would be wise for us to put together any concerns we might have and present those at the public hearing.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir. Mr. Henry?
from our perspective, I think that the most important thing that I see would be for them to have some kind of disclaimer that if you are making an ethics complaint, or if you think you have an ethics complaint, you should make it to the board first and not make it to the inspector general, because the inspector general can't offer the confidentiality that the board can offer. So if they make it to us and we decide we're not the right place, we refer them to the inspector general, no harm, no foul. But if it goes the other way, then you've gone public with something that maybe you're not quite ready to see in the public view yet.
Anyone?
Chair?
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Costa?
That's what I feel like it could be a slippery slope if we don't say some sort of comment towards this, is because if we're trying to maintain that confidentiality and get the public to feel comfortable coming forward with things, is if you have someone in particular that isn't going to mention that on the hotline, we can ask them to, but if it's not already preset in their predispositions, then somebody may do just that. And I think that's kind of the scary part about this to me. Looking at this is, one, not only are we looking at two parallel things possibly now, so we're overlapping when we could be, I think it's just creating something new that we already have put in place, but is also that maintaining that trust from the public that we're really trying to get, which I think is very critical at this time.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
I have significant concerns about this, as we've articulated, as train has been moving. And I would be very interested in hearing what some of our advocates have to say about this. And I would hope that there could be some public outreach that would explain the differences between the two entities and help the public understand that we are in fact independent of the city. Because I do think that, as Mr. Herring commented, that's the key difference between us and the Inspector General. I would love to see, and I'm not sure, Amy, if Amy's still on this call, what in fact the policies are going to be once it has gone through the process. If we just have a hearing tomorrow and then we're moving forward with public hearing on July 8th, is that correct? Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then how much time occurs after the public hearing before the city commission would vote on it?
Usually that at the time of the public hearing, the city commission votes on an ordinance.
The same time? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I just think we owe it to the city of Tallahassee that voted to put this independent board in place to explain the difference between the two moving forward.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir. Mr. Herring?
I'd remind everyone that the folks in the coalition, when they drafted the language that amended the city charter, it didn't just create the board, the hotline, while it's certainly associated with the board is technically it's in the charter under the jurisdiction of the ethics officer, and we coordinate on that, but that's an independent thing from the charter. So there are ample opportunities for confusion for the public when they see something in the charter and they call up a phone number that turns out to be somebody who works for the mayor and the commission.
Mr. Chair, this is Gwen again. My guess is that the coalition is very aware of this, and we'll be vocal about it. And we need them to be at this point. They're the citizens that have stood behind this, and this is a new move that I'm not quite sure. Let me rephrase that. I do know what's causing this, but what my main concern is that we do what's right for the citizens of Tallahassee.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Floyd.
speaking as staff and as the individual who comes in contact with city employees and the public, and who the person who most the public and employees are looking at for as an individual that they can trust. I think that whatever the city does, there needs to be clear collaboration between the city and the board and clear delineations in roles. Unfortunately, it was drafted without any discussion from us, but nothing prohibits us from this point from asking the city commission to seriously consider some of our concerns, not asking them to stop what they're doing or anything, not even to question what they're doing, but for the sake of the future and the functions of the board, that we, before the ordinance is finalized, that we have a discussion in a problem-solving role to take away any concerns or issues such as conflict over a complaint or something going to the wrong person, etc. Those are things I think that can be dealt with if the decision is made to address it jointly.
So I guess to kind of put a bow on this, I guess maybe I can consult with Mr. Reed, come up with a statement, let you all review it, add what you feel is necessary, remove what you feel needs to be removed, and then we can have that presented to the commission.
Mr. Chair, just a quick question.
Yes, sir.
What are the obligations of the city commission to fund this board? Is that anywhere in the ordinance, the level of funding that to provide this board?
Or this inspector general position?
No, this board, our board.
Oh,
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Herring?
the ordinance does not set any level of funding. I suspect that, they could go to $1 and say that we're funded, but I would also say that they have been from the inception of the board, because I've been here since the first meeting, the city has been generous, more than adequate in its funding of the board, and we haven't seen any indication that they would do anything else. But there's nothing in the ordinance that establishes any minimum level of funding, and I think the chair is the one who probably is most familiar with the implications of that.
Mr. Chair, just future concern. If some people view us as doing the same work as the Inspector General, you give grounds to reduce our funding for that reason. So definitely keep in mind that could be an aspect out there, that if the city considers us to be duplicative of the Inspector General, they may not find it necessary to fully fund us as we are now.
Right. So that would definitely be, I think, a concern that needs to. Are you saying that concern needs to be raised within any communication?
I Definitely some aspect that we can put it in there. If we think it's unnecessary at the time, we can remove it. But I think we should address, at least raise the concern internally. If we as a board think it's unmerited at this point, we can remove it. But I think it's something we can consider that, we have Inspector General moving quickly now. This is a quick ordinance. And we still haven't understood his relationship with us, and it may impact us and maybe give grounds for funding to be reduced to this board.
Okay. Anyone else want to add to this discussion?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just to add on the technical nature and the timing of the public comment, I got the impression that the board's now saying there'll be no public comment issued for tomorrow's meeting, but instead wait until the July 8th meeting.
I believe that was stated. Do we still have the representative from the commission who could speak to that? Amy?
Oh, yes. Am I unmuted?
Yeah.
So what is the question?
Mr. Reed, what was your question again?
Yeah.
You can offer public comment at either the introduction of the ordinance or at the time that the ordinance is set for public hearing. And tomorrow is good. Comments would be by email. If you go to the website, you can see the place where you can make email comment. We expect the July 8th meeting to actually be an in-person meeting based on the governor's most recent executive order, which seems to put an end to the Sunshine Law waiver as of June 30th. So unless that changes, which is always possible, we expect the July 8th meeting to be in person.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah. I agree with that assessment. Chapter 166 requires just 2 hearings. I think if we have 2 bites at the apple, we might want to consider taking them, because we may raise an issue that's a legitimate issue. We've had a very good, very positive working relationship with the city. We may raise an issue that we could collaborate on over the next month. So we may be able to work on some language. If we've raised an issue that maybe they've not looked at, or maybe they're looking at it differently than we are, it would give us an extra month to maybe work with the city to try to alleviate any issues we may see.
Okay.
So so for that purpose, I think some general statements and what some of the concerns for me primarily is the issue of the confidentiality, not only for ethics complaints, but I think we also need to be cognizant of whistleblower, actually see that as being more problematic, since that usually involves litigation. We want to be out of that, but if somebody inadvertently filed a whistleblower complaint with us and we need to pass it over to the Inspector General, we need something to maintain that confidentiality. Palm Beach County, in their ordinance, I think Richard's brought up an AGO that's touched on the issue. It is permitted, but it needs to be established in ordinance to allow the ethics officer to serve as a conduit for a whistleblower to the Inspector General in order to preserve that confidentiality.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
I agree that it would be good to provide as much input as often as possible. However, the deadline to submit public comment on tomorrow's meeting, I believe, will have expired by the time our meeting tonight ends.
I think it's 11 a.m. tomorrow. Correct.
Okay. I've seen it both ways, 8 p.m. the evening before.
It's 11 a.m. tomorrow.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I would agree. I think a short statement, it might be along the lines of what John said. It could be, 4 to 6 sentences that just raise the broad issues of overlap and confidentiality and passing issues back and forth as they're appropriate, just to make sure that they have had some chance to consider those things. Because at the July meeting, presumably they'll have an ordinance in front of them that they would be adopting. And I assume they could do amendments to that point, but I assume they would not be huge. Typically, they should not be huge substantive amendments that rewrite the whole proposed ordinance.
Chair, is a motion in order at this time? Would a motion be in order at this time?
Move to approve the drafting of a statement to be submitted before 11 a.m. tomorrow. Is that what we're trying to decide? Okay. And Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask John a question. John, have we started working on this statement, or is this something that's going to need to be put together?
So Dwight did a first draft, and I'm actually in the process of redlining it now.
Perfect.
So,
Perfect. Okay.
And we should state what we were working on. It would come from the chair and he would finalize the draft.
I think I'm having signal issues.
Ms. Graham made a motion to submit something before 11 a.m. tomorrow.
I would second that.
We can take a vote. Brian, can you hear us? Uh-oh.
I see. Mr. Vice Chair.
yeah.
Mr. Vice Chair, Carlos.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah, I think I had some network issues. All of a sudden it shut down on me.
Yeah, bandwidth.
Okay.
There was a second by Mr. Payne on Ms. Graham's motion.
Okay.
We vote? I don't think Brian's twirling around there.
I have a motion, a second, any discussion? All's in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The motion passes.
And we should note that that vote was carried out by the Vice Chair.
Because our chair is twirling.
We moving on to the next topic now?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's move on.
We don't have a report of issues received. There were no complaints in May. I believe the next item would be the budget report. And if the chair was online, he would be asking if there are any questions or comments regarding the budget.
We need a motion on this?
I don't remember. I don't think so. If there are no questions or comments, we can move on.
No comments, move on to the next item.
The next item is public comments. We only have, let me see, we have two attendees. Mr. Budson submitted a comment for the non-agenda items. However, since he has his hand raised, he may want to speak on another agenda item. So, Mr. Vice Chair, I would recommend that you allow him to speak.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right? Okay, I'm Peter Butzine, 1628 Woodgate Way. I'm part of the coalition that developed this board. I want, first of all, just say that the coalition welcomes Kristin Kosta to the Independent Ethics Board. We look forward to meeting you in person. You join a volunteer board that has an important responsibility of helping to ensure that city officials serve public interest and maintain the highest ethical principles. The main thing I wanted to talk about is a non-agenda item, but I'd like to speak briefly to 2 points. The first one is in regard to the creation of the Office of the Inspector General. I have submitted testimony to city commissioners regarding this action. I oppose this move, not only because of some of the duplications in the role of the Ethics Board, but more importantly, that the office, as Richard Herring points out, won't be truly independent. I've recommended that if the city creates this office, it should follow the example of Jacksonville, which selects its inspector general from an independent selection board. It's actually called the Independent Selection and Retention Board, similar to the appointment process for our Tallahassee Independent Ethics Board. Moreover, I've expressed reservations about the costs associated with effectively funding an office of inspector general. Jacksonville is the only city in Florida that has this office, and it's a consolidated government, city-county government. Several counties have offices of inspector general, although usually they're within the offices of the clerks of the court. So I see this as creating a rather expensive bureaucracy, not to mention the issues that you already raised about confidentiality of complaints. The other issue that I wish to address is relates to agenda item 7B. Catherine Bear, a member of our coalition, is traveling today, and she's asked me to share her comments regarding this agenda item. Mr. Reed was initially hired at the rate of $125 per hour, and at the time, Citizens for Ethics Reform encouraged the board to hire Phil Claypool as its attorney, simply because we felt that he was by far the most qualified candidate. He also, his hourly rate was more expensive. I think it was $300 or something like that. But Mr. Reed was selected, at least in part, because of his low hourly rate. We believe it's disingenuous of the Ethics Board to now double that rate. And we recommend that if the salary for the position increases to $250 per hour, then the selection of the board counsel ought to be opened to consideration of other applicants. And that is the end of my testimony on those two issues.
Thank you, Mr.
That's the only public speaker that we have at the moment, Mr. Chair. I'm Vice Chair, and I see that the chair is operable again.
Yes, I hope so. Am I? Do you hear me?
Yes.
You don't have kids playing games in the other room, do you?
Nah, that's the first place I looked. I don't know what was going on. I cut my other computers off and my printer to make sure. So hopefully I'm in now. So that was the only comment that we had?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any reflections or discussions concerning the public comment from anyone? Right.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Payne.
I don't see it on the agenda, but are we doing a final vote on the board council contract at this time?
That's 7B. 7B.
Yeah, that's 7B on our agenda on the old business. So we're coming up on that now after the public comments. We'll be entering into that old business stage. And I guess I'll move forward to old business. At the last meeting, we asked Mr. Floyd to share some of the training topics identified through meetings and workshops with city employees. Mr. Floyd, will you provide those updates at this time?
Yes, and I'll be very brief with this. You have it. I had meetings with different departments and had a couple of brainstorming sessions. I asked them to identify behaviors that they might want to address in ethics training. And there was a topic called Tone at the Top that addresses leadership. Another one, and I categorized these. There was a desire to put emphasis on organizational values. Some of the references that I've looked at already are the administrative policies and procedures. Not everybody knows about section 706.6 in the personnel policy and procedures that has conflicts of interest and other ethics policies. Then you have the Tone at the Top, which addresses bullying, creating fear or retaliation, unequal treatment of employees, changing the rules for leadership, things of that nature. Lies of convenience, borrowing city equipment, clocking in from home or in the car before arriving at work, borrowing petty cash and returning it, using sick leave for something other than sick leave, addressing those type of issues. And then I don't have a better category, but as I develop training, I'll come up with better topics. But the other one falls within City of Tallahassee and ambassadors, and that really deals with the appearances of things as much as anything, clarifying the gift ban for employees versus covered individuals, and promoting family businesses, etc. So those are, you all asked me what I was looking at. So those are some of the topics. It will expand as we continue development. That's it, unless there are any questions, Mr. Chair.
All right. Any questions from?
Okay, and there you go.
Right. 7B, negotiation of board council contract. This item was presented to the board at the May meeting. We agreed to table this discussion to allow for public comment. I think we've heard that. We've heard from the public, and it's responsibility of the board now to make a decision. At the last meeting, Mr. Floyd had multiple recommendations. We asked him to break those recommendations down so each could be considered separately. Mr. Floyd, can you bring us back up to speed on that aspect?
Sure, and I'm going to go over a little bit of what we talked about last time just to bring us up to speed. On May 1st, 2019, the Independent Ethics Board entered into an agreement with Attorney John Reed for legal services. The effective date of the contract was February 7, 2019 to September 20th, 2020. For the period of February 7, 2019 through September 30, 2019, the agreement required a fee of $120 per hour, and then compensation for attorney Josephina Tamayo as a backup at a rate of $200 and no cent. The idea of the contract was that the parties would reconvene in September of 2020. Mr. Reed actually agreed to hold off on that because of all the things that were occurring. And up to now, that September 30th negotiation has not taken place. The issue was reported to the board in 2019 and tabled at that point. In May, we discussed the issue and it was tabled to allow public comment, which you have heard. I would note that the prior councils, Jerry Currington and Simon Marsteller, were compensated at rates of $250 per hour and $275 per hour, respectively. Attorney Reed first worked with the Independent Ethics Board as an independent advocate during the fall of 2018, where he oversaw 2 complaints from their filing to resolution at probable cause panel. At that point, the board was paying Attorney Reed $275 per hour for his services. Attorney Reed applied to be the board attorney and was offered the position at $125, we stated earlier. Attorney Reed previously worked for the U.S. District Judge Hinkle at a rate of $300 per hour, and he charges his clients $250. We're currently compensating Attorney Minnis as a rate of $250, and I don't have it written here, but I believe we're compensating Clay Poole as a standby advocate. We haven't used him in recent times, but he's still under contract with us as a standby advocate for, I believe it's $250. The Attorney Reed's contract is subject to renewal in 3 months. I would also point out that at this point, Mr. Reed is heavily involved in the litigation concerning the former ethics officer. Therefore, it's my recommendation that the board approve an increase in compensation to Attorney Reed for his legal services at a rate of $250 per hour, as spoken to in the last meeting, retroactive to May 19, 2020. There's a second recommendation that the board approve Deborah Menace as the backup legal attorney to John Reed at a rate of $250 per hour. And a third recommendation that the negotiated rate of payment cover the period May 19th, 2020 through September 30th, 2021, rather than come back in September to have this same discussion. That's where we are, Mr. Chair.
All right. I guess I'll open this for discussion at this point. If anyone wants to chime in, if anyone wants to go to a vote, that's up to you all as the board.
Mr. Chair.
I'd like to hear from some of you all first.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Herring.
Just two pieces of background information, particularly for our new member. When we did the proposal, our request for proposals for our new board attorney a year and a half or so ago, or a little over a year ago, we ranked the applicants on a number of factors, and we gave percentage weightings to each of those factors. The weighting in our ranking was for the hourly rate was 10%. In other words, we figured that 10% of our final determination would be based on their salary proposal or their compensation proposal. It had been higher, and several of the members said, we are far less concerned about what we pay than we are about the competence ultimately of the attorney we choose. The other thing was, I think Mr. Claypool got 2 of the 6 votes in that meeting. Mr. Claypool agreed to, did work with us after that as a consulting attorney, along with Mr. Reed, as we were redoing our bylaws, a substantial rewrite of our bylaws and administrative procedures. And Mr. Claypool agreed, as our current ethics officer pointed out, to be available if and when we needed an attorney, which if we move forward with any ethics complaints, we would have to hire an outside attorney to act as basically kind of the prosecutor on those, since the board counsel would continue to represent the board. And presumably Mr. Claypool or some other attorney, right now Mr. Claypool would be on board as our automatic go-to guy for those kinds of things. So he is in the picture, even though he was not selected in the process in 2019.
Anyone else have any comments? Ms. Costa, do you have any questions about, or do you want some more background, or anyone?
No, I'm okay. I watched some of the last meeting, so I kind of got up to speed with what was going to be said today.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Payne.
I just wanted to say that it appears that the rate of $250 an hour is pretty much the market rate or below the market rate for a similar position. I think Mr. Reed has proved his worth in the past year and more. So I have no problem with the proposed contract.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Ms. Graham.
I was just wondering if Mr. Payne had seen my notes on this, because you pretty much said exactly what I wanted to say.
I promise you, I did not defy the public meeting law.
That's right. It would have been a violation of some sort of law. I understand that. Well, I just want to say that to the coalition's comments, I remember exactly as Mr. Herring has commented, the amount of compensation was minimal compared to the capabilities of the individuals in terms of the representation of the board. So I, as an attorney myself, I do recognize that it's sometimes overwhelming for people to understand that $250 an hour is in fact relatively low. So I think that we should move forward with this, and I will vote in favor of it, primarily because I have been so thankful and appreciative of all of Mr. Reed's excellent work. I think he's entitled to this, and I think in 3 months we will have a chance to review his contract again. I will say, Mr. Reed, that I would not anticipate there to be a salary increase in 3 months. So just, I hope
That's fine.
in full disclosure, I just want to say that. So if that's going to be something that's a concern for you, that's just my feeling. So I will agree to move forward with this increase in John's salary, and I'm very thankful for all of the hard work you do, John.
Ms. Graham, I'd point out that the third recommendation would be that we not do a renegotiate or look at the rate again in September of 2020, but that we look at it again in September of 2021. So it wouldn't be 3 months, it'd be 15 months.
Right.
Hello.
Sorry.
Makes me more comfortable.
All
Again,
right.
I just, we just have to recognize that for many, this is a lot of, that it's hard for some people to wrap their brains around $250 an hour, even though we all know that there are lawyers in Tallahassee that are paid much more than that per hour. And no disrespect to my colleagues in the bar, but some of them don't deserve it.
Well, I wanted to chime in a little. I think Mr. Herring mentioned two. There were Mr. Claypool at the last go around. He had 2 of the 6 votes. I think I was one of those 2, and at the time, I was concerned about potential personal relationship issues with our then ethics officer. I can tell you, in this time period that Mr. Reed has been in the chair, I have really grown to appreciate, and I think the competency, the writing skills, the legal analysis, everything is just has been superb in my mind. And so I'm definitely in favor, and I really like the fact that it's all about the work product, and then he's very personable at that. In addition to that, so I would like to see him around for a few more months with us.
Three months, my gosh, no, you're in for the long run now, John. All right, well, you want to move forward?
I guess at this point, do we have a motion on the floor concerning this, or are you all trying to table this again, or?
No,
Motion. Chair, we have a motion to follow staff's recommendation to increase the rate to 250. John Reed.
Okay. Is there a second or any additions to that? I think.
Clarification.
Yes, sir, Mr. Herring.
There were 3 staff recommendations. Is that recommending approval of all 3? Because the first recommendation was 250 retroactive to May 19. The second one was to approve Deborah Minnis as the backup attorney, since Ms. Tamayo has taken a position with the state. She was John's backup. And the third was for the $250 per hour to cover the period from today through September of 2021. There were 3 separate recommendations from Mr. Floyd.
Mr. Herring, I think it was retroactive to the last meeting, is what we had agreed upon.
That's the first of Mr. Floyd's 3 recommendations.
Chair, I'll follow all 3 recommendations from staff. That's my motion.
It's noted. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, it's been properly moved and second. All in favor of extending Mr. Reed's contract at the rate of $250 per hour and having that payment be retroactive to the last meeting, which was May 17th, 2020. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Hearing opposed, it carries. And so welcome back, and we look forward to having you.
Thank you, members. And just to clarify, that did also include Ms. Minnis as the backup.
Correct. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So we can have that noted to that motion.
She's outstanding. Thank you.
All right. So at this time, I think we move to agenda item number 8, citizens access during the public meetings. And Mr. Payne also asked that we agenda this item. So we want to make sure we address that now. Mr. Payne?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the duties of the Ethics Board, according to the city charter, is to recommend proposed ordinances or resolutions, etc. And I believe it's time for the board to exercise that duty regarding performance of the city commission relating to Chapter 286, the Sunshine Law, specifically in requiring public to have ample opportunity for input. When the city commission, most of whom were placed into office in December 2018 through 2019, they initiated some vast improvements in allowing public input, not just at a scheduled agenda point, but for each agenda item, comments were solicited by the public. And in fact, the Ethics Board, I think, recognized that effort in their last annual report. And I think they should be commended on that. But since March, since the city commission meetings have been forced online, essentially public input has been shut down. Although public hearings have been placed on the city commission agendas, there is no actual hearing of the public and has not been since March. People are allowed to submit comments that are placed into the public record for the meeting. Those comments generally don't appear until after that meeting. So the rest of the public is not aware of any the words of anybody else in the public. I think we have. I should point out that the city treasurer clerk addresses each agenda item to say how many public comments were received on each item, but those items are not read into the record, and they are not even recorded as to how many are in favor of or opposed to a particular item. I've seen some items where over 70 public comments were submitted in opposition to an item on the agenda, maybe one in favor of, and the proposal was voted in favor without any reference to it being in opposition to the bulk of the public comments. We have proved, Mr. Floyd has proved with this meeting here, that public comments can be heard real time on the existing city infrastructure. I've also participated in meetings of the city planning department where they did a similar thing, where we could see the members of the planning department, but there were, I believe, 9 members of the public that submitted comments, both mainly verbally, using their own voice, and in fact, receiving real-time responses to those comments. I know it's been discussed that by next city commission meeting, the meetings will be open to the public again. That's a supposition. But even when the meetings are open to the public again, there will be many people who will choose not to attend because of health issues or things of that nature. And I think those people should still be given the chance to be heard. So I think it's appropriate for the Ethics Board to draft an official letter to the City Commission requiring or requesting that the City Commission abide to the letter of the Sunshine Law to accept public opinion and public hearing. And I just offer that as a motion that such a letter be drafted to the City Commission.
Any discussion on this recommendation or this motion from Mr. Payne?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir. Mr. Aaron?
I would agree wholeheartedly with Mr. Payne, and for a couple of reasons. While the current governor's order may expire at the end of June, we don't know what's going to happen with the pandemic and where we may be in the fall or early in 2021. And in addition to that, I know that there are people floating around various conceptual proposals to talk about having allowing government meetings to be online, not just in reaction to a pandemic, but because it would actually potentially provide greater public access to people whose transportation is limited or people who, for whatever reason, can't be at a public hearing. Whether those will be presented to the legislature, I don't know. How they fall in line with the Florida Constitution, I don't know. But I think that for the City Commission to take the kind of action Mr. Payne is proposing would get them ahead of the ahead of where we may be going anyway in terms of access to public meetings.
Anyone else have any comments?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I just also wanted to point out Executive Order 2069. Its sole purpose appears to be to allow a quorum of the board or commission that is not physical. It explicitly states that the order does not waive any other provision of the Sunshine Law.
Of course, it'll be up to the board to discuss, I guess, to decide which route we want to take with this. My only concern is the appearance of an overstep, especially if it's not concerning ethics per se. When we're saying we think you should allow the public to be able to comment more at, do we stop it at this commission, or are we recommending this for every board throughout the city, or how do we fit into that? I guess it's in essence advising another group how to conduct their meetings.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
The city charter provides that we recommend resolutions specifically to the City Commission.
Okay.
There is a letter already in circulation directed to the City Commission and the County Commission, signed by a multiple. Last time I counted, about 70 community activists that have signed those letters. I believe there is a letter that I've heard that the League of Women Voters of Tallahassee is also generating such a letter. But our role would not be to advise the County Commission. Of course, we are specifically limited to the City Commission. But I think that we shouldn't drop the ball and be behind the curve on this aspect of it.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
sorry. I would be supportive of Mr. Payne's advice to the City Commission and guidance. I think that's one of the things that we should be doing more of. We should be encouraging public access as much as possible and meeting all of the ethical components of the Sunshine Law, which quite frankly, unfortunately, are not always met So I think that the issue is whether you can have citizens able to participate. In fact, is that it, Mr. Payne, that there has not been as much access as there should be?
That is correct. The statute states that the public is to be given every opportunity to be heard. And although the public is allowed to submit comments, they are not heard. And in my mind, there's a big difference in directly hearing, and specifically for the city commission themselves to hear the public speak directly to them and to hear their concerns about specific issues.
I think this is the kind of thing that the independent ethics board should be doing. And I would be supportive. Mr. Payne, have you written the letter? Have you started drafting it up?
I have not. I have a copy of the other letter I mentioned that's been there. We could kind of use that as a ground, but I'll be glad to create my own draft and submit it to the rest of the board.
I kind of see it the opposite way, is if we kind of diminishing the independence aspect, because now it seems like we're becoming an advocacy group for probably some of those advocacy groups by trying to facilitate this for them or for others. I just don't see how this addresses the ethics.
Well, Mr. Chair, I understand what you're saying. I do think, though, that in my opinion, that as the independent ethics board for Tallahassee, for the city of Tallahassee, we do have some obligation to, wherever we can, weigh in on increasing ethics, increasing access, having everything be in the sunshine. And I think that's ultimately what Mr. Payne's point is, that it's one thing to submit a written comment if it's never read out loud, if it's never actually heard, where does it go?
But would that be if someone sent the complaint to us seeking redress for not being allowed to have their comments heard at the at the commission meeting, would that be under our jurisdiction?
Well, haven't we done advisory opinions before? Haven't we? Things that we just know, Mr. Herring?
No.
I thought we had at some point. No?
Someone would request one, I would think. I guess we self-initiated, I guess, but wouldn't this all be pertaining to our ethics code? If someone is, again, not being allowed to speak, and we think is that an ethics violation, or is that against the law if they're not going along with the Sunshine Law?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Aaron?
In response to Ms. Graham's question, we got Mr. Currington to write an opinion on the issue of whether we could do advisory opinions, and he thought that legally we could, but we've never been asked for a formal one.
I knew we had talked about it.
We have made recommendations to the city on things other than ordinances. For instance, we recommended a fraternization policy. We recommended they look at free parking passes at the airport, on things that were related to ethics. But while I'm in line with Mr. Payne, let me support the chairman on one thing. Here's what the charter says. The board shall recommend proposed ordinances, resolutions, or charter amendments to the city commission in all areas of ethics and corruption, including but not limited to conflicts of interest, financial disclosure, voting conflicts, hotline policies, ethics education, ethics and procurement, campaign ethics and financing, and lobbying. That's in terms of us making recommendations to the city, or to the city commission. That's what the charter says.
But it says including but not limited to, so it's pretty.
It is very open-ended, but virtually all of those things are conflict of interest, financial disclosure, voting conflicts, and everything else has the word ethics in it. So the chairman makes a good point that this could be perceived as overreaching. It would depend on what we wrote too.
I want to let Ms. Costa speak, but I would see this more as a in that category instead of an advisory opinion as a recommendation that we have done before. I think I want to, there's a clear, in my opinion, those are two very different things. You know, a recommendation is just a suggestion that this would be a better way to go.
I think we did in one of our recommendations to the city commission mention to them that we thought that the way they were handling public comments in the meetings where they were giving very brief periods of time, like a minute per person or 30 seconds per person or whatever, or 5 minutes for 70 people, and to their credit, the new mayor and commission substantially opened up what they had been doing.
We're very influential.
That's us.
Ms.
Could we is there, and there may not be a format for this, but is there a format almost like a point of information that after this meeting we could let whichever power that be know how successful our meeting was with open public comments, and that there is a system in the city to do that? And if they would like some more information on that, we'd be happy to, Mr. Floyd would maybe be happy to help that person make that happen for them as well. So is there like a point of information way to say it, or is it more of just a recommendation really?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Payne.
Meeting is being recorded, and I believe it will be posted on the city's board docs site along with our agenda. And the video recording will be there, so we could easily record as part of our letter. We could reference that video recording, and I can provide a recording to the other city meeting that I referenced at the planning department.
Again, I just have concerns about it because I don't, where does it end? Do we, next board that we can say we don't like how efficient this meeting is being run, or we don't think the people, do we start addressing capacity, or, the people can't be heard because they can't get in, or there's no parking space. We think you should have more parking so you can have room for more citizens to attend your meetings. Where does it stop? And we could all tie it back into we're trying to provide for the citizens, and so they can be heard. But I think it's a reach, an overstep for us to try to tell someone how to conduct their meetings. And what if it starts coming back our way?
What if we just
Mr. Ray?
Yes. Mr. Chair, I agree with your position on the matter as far as our role and what we are to give recommendations on. We send this letter out and nothing changes. It will be not to our benefit. The individual commission members, they have every right to request those comments to be read if they want to. That's the decision. Now we have this meeting is being recorded. They can look at it. I think they're fully aware of the capabilities of the system we're using because it is their system. But I don't think it is our position to start telling them that they're not somehow not performing or conducting a meeting that we believe is sufficient to meet with the laws. So I will not be in agreement to send this recommendation to them at this point. Members of the public can make their complaints themselves to the city itself. But at this point, I don't think it's proper for us to make a recommendation in this instance. I know in the past, we made recommendations regarding the city's commission conduct in public meetings, but that only changed, we got a new commission in place. So at this point, it's up to the commission to make their call themselves. If they feel that they can do it, they can do it. But I don't think it's us right now to step up. We have enough on our plate to deal with regarding ethics and our responsibilities on that aspect. Then we start to appear as being more. I don't think anybody that if we send this letter out, it's not going to be seen as a benefit or assisting the city, or anybody in the city saying this has it helped them to see something they haven't seen themselves. Many of us view this as more of us trying to interfere with their process. So I will leave it up to them to make the decision what they believe is proper for their board and for their city at this aspect. If it's related to ethics, that's where we step in, but not in this aspect regarding, sunshine law, which is something, if they feel they're compliant with it, if any letter is saying to us they're making recommendations, it may imply that we feel they're not in compliance with sunshine law, which I don't think we're in a position to say that right now.
Ms. Barr?
Yes, I was just saying that, I mean, it seems like it might be split down the board, down the middle. So just take a brief vote, see what people think.
We had a motion. I didn't hear a second from on Mr. Payne's motion. All right, I think I heard Ms. Graham say she would second that. So we have a vote on the table to submit a letter. I guess we will have to get to the details, but to submit a letter recommending to the commission that they allow citizens access during their public meetings in the same fashion in which this independent board of ethics has done. So, so I guess I'll take that to a vote at this point. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right, I think I have Mr. Payne, Mr. Herring, and Ms. Graham in favor. So all opposed? Mr. Ray and Ms. Costa as opposed. Ms. Barr, do you have?
I abstain. Doesn't matter.
So you're the deciding vote? No, yes, you are.
Now, 3 no's and 3 yeses is a no vote.
It's a no?
Yeah.
3 in favor, 2 opposed,
Oh, 2
and
opposed?
1 abstention for Ms. Barr. And if she would have, I don't get to vote right now, so.
You're not voting?
I can still?
Yeah, you do.
I'm opposed.
So it goes down.
Right. Mr. Chair,
Yes.
could I
Sure.
suggest this? Could we ask our ethics officer to explore how this board could take telephonic or electronic public comment during meetings after we begin to meet in person again? And if we find that there is a way to do that we recommend to the city that they explore also doing that in order to open up the ability of the public to comment at their meetings. In other words, disentangle this from the pandemic. But first, do it ourselves first. And if we find that it's possible, just say that we think that this is a way to garner more public confidence.
Well, let me back up first, then I'll address that because that might be a second issue from this vote. So right now I have 3. So does it fail?
Yes, on a tie. Typically, I think on a tie vote, the measure fails.
Okay.
Mr. Reed's nodding yes.
All right. So at this time, we have decided not to go in favor of Mr. Payne's initial motion, but now we have Mr. Herring who's asking Mr. Floyd to research. I don't want to misquote you. You want him to research the process to see if things can be done after the meetings with public comments?
No, sir. What I would think is during a meeting, is there any, for instance, let's say we were having this meeting live in one of the city meeting rooms, that depending on how we were set up, either via computer or telephonically, that a member of the public who wanted to comment on an agenda item during the time for public comment could make their comment via electronic means. So they could either on a computer or a telephone, they could log in and all the members of this board could hear what they had to say if that person couldn't couldn't be at our meeting. To have a process set up to do that.
Okay, and with that information, Mr. Floyd, if he gets that information for us, then what would we be doing with it?
Well, I would think if we did something like that and it worked for us, we could simply share that with the city commission to say, you know, we found this as a best practice that worked for us, and we think that it inspires public confidence, and you know, ball's in your court.
And would that be an official? Because that would be similar to what we just voted on, in my mind.
And I'm trying to avoid that issue of how official it would be, but if we can just prove that the concept works, you know, kind of try to take the lead on actually doing this thing, that clearly is within our jurisdiction in terms of running our own meetings. And then once we see if it works and how it works, then we can decide what we wanted to do with that in terms of encouraging other people or simply holding ourselves out as a model.
Mm-hmm. Now, was it in someone's thoughts that it's more significant coming from the ethics board, or, you know, how would this be different from one of us as a regular citizen just going and contacting someone on the commission and getting them to think about this process, doing it as an individual as opposed to a board?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
At our last meeting, I discussed the ongoing discussion that I had with the mayor, and he had expressed a reluctance, I guess, to receive suggestions or criticism from an individual who is also a member of the ethics board. Did you hear all that, Mr. Chair?
I went out at the last part.
Okay. Just that there has been some reluctance accepting suggestions or recommendations from individuals who are also members of the ethics board. That's why I thought that it would be better, a more official recommendation from the board as a whole.
Now, those 70 or so people who I guess voiced their concerns to us, are they having issues being heard by the commission?
In the instance that I talked about, that there were 70 people, their comments were part of the public record, but they were never directly heard, and their comments were never addressed by the commission that voted against them. That's just one example. I've seen that for the past 3 months, that the people submitting public comments, it's a very different thing than sitting in the commission chamber and hearing the public comments. When the comments are not even read, even by the commissioner or treasurer clerk or anybody, it's basically removing the public's ability to be heard. I don't think it rises to a level of making an official complaint, and I'm not sure if compliance with the Sunshine Law falls within our purview, but so that's why I suggested just a recommendation to submit. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Mr. Payne, but I think we voted on this, and I think it's gone down. So, I think we might want to think about it and discuss if we wish to consider at the next meeting. But I think this, in my opinion, and I'm on the losing side of this. I think it's been decided.
Okay. All right. So I guess with that, hearing no other comments, we'll move over to section 9, member discussion regarding future agenda items.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I had asked to have that one item inserted between 8 and 9.
That's right. All right. So you,
Okay.
I apologize. So
No,
you want to come,
no
you want
worries.
to address those now?
I'll be very quick. Members, you should have received in your email today forms of the sworn complaint form and the petition for advisory opinion. Last July, this board approved 4 forms, which for those two, as well as the ex parte communication and the notice of election of rights form. The forms that are before you today have no substantive changes at all. It simply makes just changes to the ordinances. The misuse of position and the solicitation of gifts actually changed in number. So those corrections are made, and the failure to disclose offers of employment and disclosure or use of non-public information, which was adopted after we approved these forms, is added to the document. Other than that, there are no substantive changes. They're simply technical in nature. So I would ask the board, because that was an issue, we were trying to get the complaints loaded up onto the TalGov website for the public to be able to obtain. And I just wanted to have that change made if we could by the board tonight, so we can make that update and make it available to the public.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir, Mr. Herring.
I would move that we adopt these, but I would add to that motion that we put them on our next agenda and invite any public comment so that we can say that we've had public comment. And at that point, if we hear something, we could readdress them. I cannot imagine that we would hear anything. And I agree with John that we ought to correct this tonight if we can.
We have a second on that motion. All right, so move. All in favor of adopting these forms with Mr. Herring's recommendation that it be heard by the public, or an opportunity to be heard by the public? All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Any opposed? All right.
Thank you.
All right. And now I guess we'll move to future agenda items. Okay, I'm noticing we still have 2 items from the May meeting. The staff is following up the board recommendation on an ordinance revision concerning lobbyists and the adoption of new ethics training course with the inclusion of assessment items. We can expect those at the next meeting. So those are still future agenda items, even though we brought them up in May. Are there any other priorities that you all would like to discuss at the next board meeting?
Ms. Chair, do we think, at least right now, based on the governor's order expiring at the end of June, that our next meeting will be in person? And where will that meeting take place?
I guess we can ask Mr. Floyd to look into that. And I'm sure we would still want to maintain physical distancing, even if it is in person. So if you could find out for us where we would be scheduled to meet, and if you all could assess, if the staff can assess whether or not that meeting location is feasible for us to still maintain our distancing. And if you could let us know, I guess, within a week's time, so we can start planning that. If not, we'll just continue with this same platform.
Will do.
And Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
I think our bylaws allow, if a member is uncomfortable with that, allow, as long as it, our regular bylaws, Mr. Reed, as long as it doesn't affect a quorum, we could have 1 or 2 members still participate electronically. If there's anybody who, for health or other reasons, did not feel comfortable in an in-person meeting, a couple of us could still sit out.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that point of information. Mr. Payne?
In addition to board members, I think regardless of whether we can meet physically, I would strongly suggest the ethics board taking the position of allowing electronic participation by the public, similar to what Mr. Boutsen did today. We proved it could be done. I think we should set an example for that.
All right. And to that point, Mr. Floyd, can you also see if we can have the public use video conferencing even if we're in person? So they can basically a virtual gallery. And if we could have a screen, wherever we are, so we can see those individuals as well.
That's possible.
Okay.
I'm saying that, but it's the guys behind the scene that will make that happen.
Okay.
And I don't believe it's necessary for us to see them necessarily, but similar to what we did today with Mr. Boussine, that he can at least speak to us and be heard and be replied to if necessary.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'm the town attorney for Greenville. We've actually been conducting our meetings in that manner for the past two months. There are some challenges logistically that I'll work with Mr. Floyd on, but we've been making it work for the past couple of months, where we have 4 members of the council that are in person on camera. 1 member has a health condition, so he joins remotely, and then the public joins remotely. And we've been doing that for 2-3 months now.
All right. Great. All right. Yes, at this point, we have on the agenda public comment on non-agenda items. Mr. Floyd, do we have any additional public comments?
Mr. Butson, did you wish to speak at, originally you had another agenda item?
Yes, I would briefly. First of all, I wish to join Mr. Payne in appreciating Mr. Floyd's historic efforts to provide an opportunity for public participation at this meeting. I also appreciate Mr. Payne's pressing the issue of citizen participation in commission meetings. I was on the losing end of an effort to encourage the city to provide opportunity for real-time public participation, and I hope that won't be repeated in the future. I'm not sure whether I should be happy or relieved that you cannot see my image. I even put on my best sports shirt today for this meeting, although my wife gave me my last haircut, which was 3 months ago. My sports shirt looks great, my hair not so much. I had submitted testimony via the city's online system for taking public comments. I have subsequently learned that the city system strips out all paragraph formatting, which makes submissions extremely difficult to read. And I'd point out my 9th grade English teacher would be appalled. It's not my intention to read the testimony, which I've already submitted, but because I haven't, or who became lost in the lack of paragraphing, allow me to summarize very briefly. When our coalition drafted the ballot initiative and secured both the petitions and the votes for its passage, the campaign finance reforms were as important as the ethics package. They include 2 key provisions. 1, lowering the individual contribution limit from $1,000 to $250, commensurate with the Leon County's requirements. And secondly, and even more importantly, creating a unique $25 rebate program to encourage individual citizens to help fund the campaigns of candidates that they support. And for those of you who may not be fully appreciative of the public purpose of the rebate program, I hope that you will wade through my non-paragraphed submission. Unfortunately, the brief history of the 2014 Ethics and Campaign Finance Reform Initiative shows that most citizens and candidates have not taken advantage of the $25 rebate program. We therefore, the coalition, encourages you to aggressively promote this important reform. And following is a short list of actions that we encourage you to take as quickly as possible. First of all, instruct the ethics officers to write a letter to qualified candidates for a city commission. The letter should explain the program and suggest that candidates include the rebate form on their websites. Second, prepare an op-ed piece that explains the $25 rebate program and encourages Tallahassee registered voters to participate. I plan to prepare such an op-ed piece, but I think it would have more power coming from the Independent Ethics Board. Third, promote the program in public speaking engagements between now and the election. And last, if funding permits, launch a limited marketing campaign. We also encourage candidates to promote the rebate to help fund their own campaigns. So that's the main point that I wanted to present today, is that we're hoping that the Independent Ethics Board will help market this very important program so that citizens finally start to take advantage of it. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, sir. We have any more comments, Mr. Floyd?
That is it, unless Ms. Tolman wants to speak, that is it.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir, Mr. Herring.
could I ask that we take Mr. Butzin's recommendations to us and add them to our agenda for the next meeting?
I would think that would be a good thing to do.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Payne?
I would just second Mr. Herring's suggestion, but comment about the time frame here, because we're coming hard on election season. So we definitely would need to do something productive at the last meeting in order to be effective. I especially like the idea of a letter to the candidates, and this would be just the city candidates, explaining the refund program, letter coming either from, I think it would be appropriate coming from Mr. Floyd, but if you prefer coming from the chair, that would be fine. But I agree that it's important to get the word out. It was my comment. In fact, that was my primary negative comment on Ms. Meadows' Chief's evaluation last year, was that the refund program was not adequately marketed and advertised.
So I guess, Mr. Floyd, that's a good idea. That could be one of our pending directives. I guess I don't want to call it a marketing piece, but I guess informational item, you know, the infograms that are, I think that may be a good way to go. Just providing information to the public, especially about our ethics code and elected officials, because we have incumbents who will be running, and some of these things may be relevant to our code. So if that's something you don't mind getting together for us for a review, and we can make our edits and then have that go out to the public in a number of ways.
I'm smiling. I may ask at some point to hire someone to help with some of these things, because we have a lot of priorities, such as the investigation. My aim is whatever I do, whatever we do it well. And sometimes that takes time. As Ernie knows, preparing these digital meetings, and every time we expand a goal, it's a learning process. For example, I spent 6 hours Sunday. I spent all day Sunday working with WebEx, and spend additional hours so that we could have a successful meeting. When you add to that the time it takes to put a meeting together, and then add the investigations or any other priorities, I understand I'm not complaining. I'm simply stating that we want to do things well, and I do have some ideas. It may call for hiring someone to help with, for example, with social media, a specialist in that area. There are people who specialize in marketing, especially at today's level. So I'm hoping that you're encouraging. We have plenty of money and I like to spend it. So I hope that you're encouraging my adding that assistance. Ernie is also doesn't have a job, so I will be asking him to write letters and the such. So I'll try to be a little innovative in doing this.
All right. And that's
Chairman?
I appreciate that, Mr. Floyd. I am willing to do my part. And if nothing else, we could send out a link to the documentation that we just got updated on the website. But yeah, your recommendation on social media is apt and it's way over my head. So.
right. And a good thing is being in Tallahassee when it comes to social media and marketing. You have, what do we have? Almost 60,000 students who would probably excel in that market. You may be able to come up with an intern or something. But
Good idea.
all right. Well,
Mr. Chair?
yes, sir.
Could I, if it's appropriate, I'm not making a motion, but I'll offer you a draft motion that is, as Mr. Payne identifies, I'm sorry, Mr. Payne, as Mr. Floyd identifies a need either for assistance with social media or more specifically for assistance with investigation, or the need to hire outside counsel, which Mr. Reed could advise on, that Mr. Payne simply go to the chair with those recommendations and the chair approve that without having to come back to the board, but so that there is, the chair would be overseeing Mr. Floyd on that between now and the next meeting. If it's appropriate, I would offer that as a motion. If you don't think it's necessary, I would shut up.
Oh, I think we can do it without making a motion of it. All right. Anything else? So I guess I'll ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
All right. And we're adjourned. Have a great day. You all take care.
Thanks, everybody.
And be safe.
Good night.
All right. Good night.